Okay, thanks. I'll start again. Welcome everybody to the Culture Conversation around visitor economy. This is a set of meetings that we're doing as part of the development of the cultural strategy. And it's people invited to this meeting are from the Cultural Working Group, which is a councillor cross-party group that are supporting the delivery of the cultural strategy, and the Culture Board, a strategic group of leaders from across the city and the combined authority to support cultural development in the city. We're going to hear from Catherine Davis, who is from Visit West, going to do a presentation around visitor economy, and then we'll have lots of time to discuss and ask questions. If you want to have your camera on or off, it's completely up to you. Do whatever makes you feel most comfortable in this meeting. I will ask if you keep your mic off unless you're speaking, just so that we can manage the sound so everyone can hear everyone. Please, I mean, it's Catherine, I don't know how you want to do it, if you want to do the presentation and then have questions, or if there's a point halfway through that you prefer to do it that way.
I mean, we can keep questions to the end, but it's in different sections. So maybe when we get to the end of a section, I can say any questions just so that people don't forget them as we're going along.
Okay, great. I think that would be better rather than putting questions in the chat, because when you put questions in the chat, they pop up and it could be possibly a bit distracting for Catherine, who's presenting. Okay, brilliant. So we will move on to the presentation, and I will share my screen and just say next slide when you want me to move on. Okay. Everybody see that? Yes, thumbs up. Brilliant. Catherine, over to you.
Thank you, Elise, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. Just to give you a bit of a background, as Elise said, I'm the Chief Exec of Visit West. Our formal accreditation, if you like, is as a local visitor economy partnership. This is a new framework that was developed post-COVID by Visit England because there was no formal structure for organisations such as ours to go through and be accredited. So we received our accreditation. We were one of the first 15 back in 23, I think. And our patch, if you like, is Bristol, Bath and North East Somerset, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire. Visit West is a public-private partnership which has evolved on from Destination Bristol, and for those of you who go back even further, the Bristol Tourism and Conference Bureau. And so we are tasked with delivering work around the visitor economy. We also have the Business Improvement Districts, soon to be Business Improvement District, in central Bristol, so that's Redcliffe and Temple, Bristol City Centre and Broadmead, but for the purposes of this, we're going to focus obviously on the visitor economy. I've been working in this field for about 25 years, and before that involved in tourism, leisure and hospitality. I'm also the current president of the Tourism Management Institute, and I'm on the board of UK Inbound, which is the agency that delivers and works with inbound tourism in the UK. So just to give it some context as to what we're talking about. Finally, you'll see on each slide there are a series of logos on the bottom. Visit Bristol is our consumer brand for Bristol and the M5 corridor. Visit Bath does the same job for Bath. The Bath and Bristol logo on the right hand side is what we use with our leisure travel trade, which I'll come on to a bit later. And then the tiny pink one is Meet Bristol and Bath, which is the convention bureau that looks after business events and wider event support for the region. Okay, Elise, next slide. So I'm starting off by giving you some sort of headlines in terms of the context, and this is specifically for Bristol unless I say otherwise. So Bristol is the 7th most visited town by international visitors. That doesn't mean that they're all staying in hotels or short-term lets. That could be people visiting friends and relatives and staying with them. The largest segment is holiday visitors and visiting friends and relatives before you go on to business And then this wonderful category of miscellaneous, which covers a wide range of things such as specific sports events or music events where people might just be coming in for that purpose rather than a wider run. The visitor economy is £1.24 billion. That's what it's worth to the Bristol economy from a total West of England value of £2.5 billion. So Bristol's really the powerhouse of the region's visitor economy. And this is largely due to the fact that we have the highest concentration of accommodation in the region, so there are more places for people to stay. South of Birmingham and west of London, we are the largest city in terms of delivering the visitor experience and the visitor economy. You can see there that 27% of our visitors are international, but they account for about half of our spend. So the impact of those international staying visitors is significant, which is why we do quite a lot of work in terms of coalescing the region and the cities into a cohesive offer for international visitors. And I've also marked in there about Bristol being the highest ranking English city in the GDS index. This is the Global Destination Sustainability Index, and I'll go into that in a little more detail, but that's important in terms of the context that we're working with. As you can see, there are, back in 23, which is the last data we have, because we're waiting for the 24 data to come through, there were 38 million visits to the UK overall. Now, London kind of dominates this. So you have, in terms of visits into the UK, London, which kind of dominates everything by some considerable margin, then Scotland, particularly Edinburgh, and then we move on to the English cities. Next slide. These are our key facts. Every year we have a volume of value study that we put together. This is with the South West Tourism Research Company. So it's an independent company who use something called the Cambridge model to evaluate the value and volume of the industry. Now, in terms of total related direct visitor spend, as you can see, there's that £1.25 billion mark that we have there. The Cambridge model is a top-down model. So we take national data, apply local anomalies and local data that we collect to come out with that figure. There's a second model, which is called STEAM, which does the opposite. It takes local data and then applies the national data. It's not helpful for the industry having two. We think that STEAM slightly overestimates the value and the volume, whereas Cambridge slightly undervalues, and there's some work going on nationally to kind of benchmark this and come up with a better solution. The difference for us is about £27,000 in terms of the production of the report. So we go with the one that costs least, which comes up with a similar amount. Next slide. Now, tourism gets a bit of a rap, and you can see at the moment there are some very specific issues taking place in Europe, in Edinburgh, particularly around the fringe, about pricing people out of homes. One of the challenges that we have with the industry is that at the moment there's no regulation around short-term lets, and Bristol has one of the highest instances of bookings of short-term lets in the UK. It's usually around 4th or 5th. So we're very aware of the fact that tourism is not always welcomed, and if it's not managed well and it is not marketed in the right way, then it can cause problems. The short-term let registration scheme is going through the system at the moment. We hope to have something announced in the tourism strategy later this year, which I'll talk about a bit later. But the reason we talk about the visitor economy as opposed to tourism is that tourism predominantly looks at the leisure side. And as you'll see in Bristol, it's a lot wider than just holiday and leisure visits. Next slide. And we're counting more than pounds in this. Some great work that's gone on nationally is about the social value of tourism, where we're looking at how it can benefit communities across the UK, whether that's supplying good jobs for people to come into and diverse entry routes, whether it's people's first jobs, their first experience of the workplace, right through to careers which can take people all over the world. The opportunity to look at it as a catalyst for social regeneration and investment in communities through money that comes in and is spent. And if you think about international, that's all export money coming in. That's new money into the system as opposed to moving money around. Also, visitors can support local services and high streets. In fact, the biggest beneficiary of the visitor spend in Bristol and the region is retail and food and drink. And so there's an argument of, would we be able to deliver the retail and the food and drink to the level we have without that visitor spend? There's also an opportunity to support public transport, particularly for rural areas, if it can be used to support visitors as well. Next slide. However, this is an industry that was affected significantly by COVID. And we've seen that in the way it recovers, museums and art galleries are still way behind in terms of their recovery to pre-COVID numbers. Now, whether that's a change in people's behaviours or a change in which people are looking for experiences and how they're choosing what to do with their spare time is open to debate. But this is from the Visit England Annual Attraction Survey that was published in May and has benchmarks against attractions all over the country. So when we see some challenges in museum and gallery visits, which we do in some areas, but not all, this isn't a Bristol problem. This is something that is really throughout the whole industry. I'm just about to go into an international section. Were there any questions from anyone on the starting points? No? Then next slide, please, Elise. So we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into our visitor profile now. And I'm going to start at looking at our international visitors. And as I said, this is really important that even though they're not the biggest segment by volume, by value, they're really important to our local economy. This is also a way to connect local communities, student populations, as well as people coming here for business events and for leisure visits. Next slide. So as I said, Bristol's the 7th most visited town or city in the UK. This is the 2023 International Passenger Survey, which we use as our benchmark. And you can see there that London accounts for more than half of those international visits. But Bristol is responsible for just under 24% of the total number of international visits for the entire Southwest, which is quite phenomenal. We're not quite back up to our peak in 2019, where we hit 636,000 visits. But once we get the data this year, then we'll have a much better picture of where we actually are. Next slide. In terms of where our international visits come from, we have similar numbers to the UK standard, but in a very different order. And if you look at Bristol's top inbound markets by volume, you'll see that there's very much a correlation in terms of inbound routes through Bristol Airport. And so while we often look at the airport as taking people away on summer holidays and such like, actually it's a really valuable way of people reaching us. So we over-index in terms of France and Spain. Germany is where it is in terms of the national profile. Switzerland is really high in terms of volume, and we have high capacity in our Swiss routes in particular, particularly one from Basel, where we actually see more international visitors coming in than UK visitors going out on that route. We're less successful in terms of those long-haul markets, unlike our partners down the road in Bath, for whom the US dominates their both the volume and value of inbound visitors. Next slide. This is taken from some Midas research that was done by Visit Britain back in 2022 that looks at driving influence of where people, how people select destinations. So it's very much around good value for money, being a welcoming destination and offering lots to do. So we take this very seriously when we're looking at how we present the destinations when we're talking to our international partners. Next slide. And Visit Britain provide a whole series of templates that look at the main motivators for specific markets. And as you can see, pretty uniform for the top ones in terms of dining in a restaurant, sightseeing of famous buildings and monuments and going shopping, with the only variation from our Swiss and Dutch visitors who like a pub visit more than they like going to see the icons. You can see now why, as a destination, the importance of our food and drink sector is critical, and that's a big part of Bristol's attraction, along with a whole variety of other assets that we have. When we look at the motivators and things like visiting museums and galleries, looking at responses to national surveys, it's seen very much as something that you do in London or Scotland, where it scores really highly. But it's really not seen it in so much in regional England. And we do ask ourselves the questions why, and we think we have something of an answer in that. Next slide. Part of this is about visibility. Now, when you're competing in a global market, it's hard enough to be seen when you're competing against not just European destinations, but those in the Americas, in Asia, across the world. So you have to have quite a compelling offer. And while we have a lot of work that we do out of our Visit Bristol and regional channels, it's really important for us to work strategically to develop those international markets through the partnerships that we have. So about a third of inbound travellers use a third party. So they'll use a package company or a tour operator to help them make decisions. You've also got what we call FIT, which is fully independent travellers. They're not usually fully independent in that they're normally using online travel agencies. So things like Expedia or Booking.com to find accommodation, or Airbnb, or then looking at experience platforms. And the example here I've got is Get Your Guide. One of the prime objectives for us is to really increase the visibility of our cultural offer using these platforms. And as you can see there, at the moment, Bristol's kind of underperforming in terms of the number of products it has available to promote through these platforms. And there's a huge opportunity to reach audiences through things like Get Your Guide and Tickets and Picnic and a whole range of other platforms. And there's really smart work that we are looking to do and hoping to do with businesses in the cultural sector, the nighttime economy, and the food and drink sector to help really take advantage of this. It's critical in terms of reaching those international visitors who will book their experiences before they come. And we can take that into account that we find our cultural sector very visible in. Next slide.
Catherine, the last little bit that you said broke up a bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I was saying that it's really important for businesses in the cultural sector to engage with these platforms because it really does raise the visibility, and because there are different platforms that work in different markets. So having a good distribution strategy for the cultural sector is critical in reaching these new audiences. Next slide. And we think there's some big opportunities to develop these international audiences, not least the screen connections of things that have been filmed in Bristol. And we work really closely with the Film Office and with our national partners to push Bristol's portfolio of filming locations that it has. Obviously, we have the Women's Rugby World Cup in September. We have the Cricket World Cup, the Women's T20 Cricket World Cup next year. So opportunities to reach new audiences and more diverse audiences through sport. Again, the distribution, and when I say music, it's not just about concerts, but festivals and events, club nights, how we can better connect that wide music heritage and portfolio that Bristol has with our international visitors, because we know it's a real touch point. We only have to look at what's happening with Idols playing their homecoming gigs in Bristol this weekend and the impact it's having on the city and the number of people that are travelling internationally to see that gig. Again, I mentioned about distribution of art and galleries. Bristol street art is a huge motivator for people to visit, and while most places in the UK and globally will have some form of street art scene, the authenticity in Bristol and the Banksy story really does play into that interest in the city as being a creative space. We also need to be more confident in our icons. We appreciate that for people locally, it can be a bit repetitive to see the whole bridge, balloons, Banksy, Brunel, but it's only by creating these icons that it resonates with people further afield who don't see this and are motivated to visit. That's the end of the international section. So if there's any questions specifically on international that anyone would like to ask now, then I'd be happy to answer them, or we can Richard.
Catherine, many thanks for that. My question is the direction of travel since COVID. Have you seen various marked changes in the international coverage?
Yeah, so there was some change in flight routes that had happened, and I think one of the challenges that we have with COVID is it buried a lot of the Brexit impact because those rules came into being then. So it's difficult to unpick what's COVID and what's Brexit. We know that the national reputation, I talked about being a sense of being welcome, that was damaged. And European visitors in particular in some markets have been slow to come back. We've seen record visits from Canada, which has been really interesting. The Asian markets, particularly China, which weren't huge for Bristol but important, have been slower to recover. And also the reality is a lot of national governments have been throwing a lot of money at attracting people to their countries. There's been a huge amount of work in terms of visa-free travel or extended visas, and that's some of the things that we've picked up in the development of the tourism strategy. So there are macro things way out of our control, but there are weird little anomalies like Switzerland boost, the boost in Switzerland, the boost in the Danish market. But yes, so there has been a bit of a change and a shift, and I think it has yet to settle down.
And do you know how many international customers fly directly into Bristol Airport and how many, say, go through Heathrow, Gatwick or others?
So for Bristol, the majority of our visitors coming, so the last time that we segmented down, I actually had a slide on this and I took it out, which I wish I hadn't now. It's about 55% that will come into Bristol Airport for Bristol. Heathrow is the next one down. Once you get outside of Heathrow, which tends to be more the long haul travel, and Bristol, it starts to peter off. So these are two critical markets, and a lot of the long haul operators will have through tickets with GWR. So if they are determined that they're coming to Bristol, their ticket will include Heathrow Express and onward travel, so operators like Cathay Pacific and American Airlines. We need to be a final destination as opposed to a day trip from London, which that's difficult to kind of measure at the moment, but we know it happens. So we want to make sure that we're holding and retaining people, and you have like this hub and spoke approach. So people stay in Bristol and then may do day trips elsewhere, but it means that we retain that evening spend, which is really important to our economy.
Wow, good.
Tibbs.
Yes, thanks for that, Catherine. I'm interested in exploring how the buying power of our visitors is then influencing and shaping the retail market, so that the retail market is kind of purposely and with that insight is creating to support the visitor economy whilst also supporting the local economy. So how are we matching that? Is there any insight into what is the core buying things, as opposed to just liking a pub or liking
Yeah.
buying, retail? What is it that they actually purchase?
People are, I think the important thing is international visitors are buying while they are here, which is different to the kind of domestic high street where you're ordering online. So you see that, the well documented decline of the high street in terms of purchasing power. The difference with internationals is that they're buying stuff here. People like local crafts and souvenirs, local food and drink to take away. So there'll be an element of the practical spend on clothing because, when people are traveling to the UK, they need umbrellas and coats and sunglasses and for the whole seasonal range that they'll get in a day. But largely it's going to be on things that are unique to the area for people to take away as souvenirs. There's not been a huge amount of research. This is more anecdotal, but we know that there's a strong desire for local. When I say local crafts, that includes food and drink and local artwork as well.
Stephen.
Yeah, I was interested in those activities and products that people pre-book. I think it was 47 activities or products were identified for Bristol. Could you give us some sort of examples of what they are? I mean, is it things like booking a show at the Hippodrome or the Old Vic or a ride on the Matthew or whatever?
No, it's so the majority of them are tours, walking tours. So we spend as an organisation a bit of time with people, like I said, to help that distribution tactic. That was just Get Your Guide as an example in terms of benchmarking. So there's a lot of tours on there, some museum entries, although not many. There are some, if I say experiences, some of them are a bit troubling. As in swimming with crocodiles, which has come up recently that we're actually doing a bit of due diligence work with from a reptile shop in Felton. But Bristol Zoo entry tickets are on there, aerospace tickets are on there, but the majority for our area is walks and tours and food tours.
Thank you.
Yeah, to move on to the next section.
Yeah. So now we're looking at our domestic visitors. So pre-COVID, we were listed as 5th most visited city by domestic visitors. This is leisure holiday visitors, sorry, not leisure holiday visitors, this is all visitors. However, recently we've seen that this has, Bristol's dropped down to 10th. We've actually queried this because it doesn't match with our own data and that of independent third parties, because Bristol's hotel occupancy was higher than pretty much everyone on there except York. And although we don't have as many hotel rooms as the top 5, we're not a million miles away from Leeds. Obviously, we have more international than Leeds, but we have queried this. And I think one of the challenges is that there was a lot of investment post-COVID by some of these destinations into domestic trips that we weren't able to match because we didn't qualify for any of the UK SPF money to drive this. So we're hoping now with the additional investment that we get from the combined authority that we can start to see Bristol climb that table again. However, despite dropping down in terms of volume, actually one of the things that's being achieved is people are staying longer, and that's very much what we want to see from our sustainability work, is to have fewer people staying longer rather than people just coming in for one night at a time. Next slide. Oh, that's a duplication, Elise. So looking at where our visitors come from, it's not really surprising that it's the places that are easiest to get to. So predominantly London and the southeast, but also southwest, West Midlands and Wales. We do find that the GWR route in particular is more productive than the cross-country route, and it's not really surprising because there's more volume on that route. We also, as I said, get the day visits from London and the southwest particularly, as well as Wales, and they're responsible for 83% of all of our day visits. And again, not particular rocket science, that the further away people are, then the more likely they are to stay overnight. Interestingly, this data is taken from our visitor survey, which was regional in 23. A fifth of our visitors who came to the region for the first time were coming from London, which is higher than it has been previously when we've done previous research. And the last time we did a big data research project for Bristol was around 2015. So we've seen a marked shift, even though the feeder markets haven't changed dramatically. What we've seen is the fact that the first time visits are very London centric. Next slide. And how do they get here? This is regional data, and it's Bristol traditionally has its biggest segment that is arriving by rail, but post-COVID we've seen a shift in terms of car use, and obviously one of the challenges around Clean Air Zone is people thinking that they can't travel into the city. Now this goes back to 2023, this data, so it was before we had park and ride sites open longer, but we do have an issue with kind of overnight parking in the city, and there is a huge opportunity for us to look at using the park and rides for overnight parking to help make a more sustainable visit for people, because once they're here they're pretty much walking or using public transport. What's interesting for us is the fact that the newer visitors, so people who are coming here for the first time, are more likely to come by train and use coaches. So they're using the public transport network, which is exactly what we're promoting, as opposed to those who are used to coming that are using their cars. So that kind of breaking the cycle is starting to work. Next slide. And again, sorry, this is just repeating the point that once people are here, they're generally walking around. A few people are using their cars because, as I said, Bristol is a really convenient base for people to explore the region. But again, higher use of bus and coach services, I think, than people maybe realise, and I think there's a huge opportunity to use now our expanding local rail network to move people around. We also look at the accessibility of visitors. With 20% of domestic visitors, someone within the household will have some kind of impairment or disability or health issue that impacts their visits. So it's really important for us to address this and work with our venues to make sure that we are giving correct information about how accessible they are, but more importantly reaching out to people beyond. And we recently had a forum for our attractions and cultural sector where we looked at this specifically. But you can see that Bristol is quite an accessible destination for people with mobility and other requirements due to disabilities or health issues. And 14% of people within a party who had this more challenging approach to travel was something that was higher than we expected, hence the reason that we're investing a bit more time and effort into this. And then we look at what people thought, because while we're looking traditionally at volumes and where people come from, that the big thing that people took away was that they felt safe in the region, they felt they were welcomed, that there's a good range of places to eat, there's a good range of things to do, that the cultural offer was strong and the public spaces. The things that scored negatively were car parking availability and cost, and public transport, although a lot of that was because my son's been at university and he says the public transport's awful. But some of those ratings that we got were lower, but just generally because people didn't experience them themselves. Next slide, Elise. And this is what you see on this slide. So, for example, if we look at the cultural offer, it was generally quite strong because there was an element of that, of people who said they couldn't comment because they didn't experience that. And particularly nightlife, you can see there that those who experienced it rated it as excellent or good, but 78% of people who, because it was a face-to-face survey, hadn't experienced it because they maybe were here for the day. This is the challenge with face-to-face surveys, and we're moving over to 100% digital from now on. One of the other things that it's important for us to look at is, again, how we talk about sustainability of the destination and the impact of visitors on that. So we did ask visitors in this survey how important the sustainability of a destination is when visiting. And as you can see there, 16% said it was very important, and over 40% said it was important. So well over half of our visitors are choosing their destination and choosing Bristol based on these sustainable credentials, which are really important to us. Next slide. I'll try and move a bit faster now, Elise. So back in 23, we launched our destination management plan. Next slide. And this is, again, where we come back. We put sustainability at the heart of it. It was the default position around which everything else happens. Next slide. And this is how we look at it. We look at how we work with businesses to support their sustainability journey, and how we communicate this, how we work with our destinations, how we as an organisation operate as well as our visitors. And that's visitor behaviour, both in getting here, moving around, and then leaving again. I mentioned earlier the GDS index. This is the Global Destination Sustainability Index. It's a mark of over 100 destinations globally, and it's growing all the time. Bristol was the #1 destination in England. We didn't quite make the top 40 there. We were ranked 51 in the world, but we had almost a 17% increase in our score. Next slide. And the score is broken down into 4 areas where we look at environment, social, supplier, and DMO. And as you can see in the bar charts, one in from the left, in terms of our supplier network, we're almost in the top 10 average there. So that looks at how our hotels, our attractions, our event management companies, our universities, our airport, how they're managing their own business operations. It has been submitted for 2025. We do expect Manchester to overtake us, not because they're a more sustainable destination, but a lot of the questions rely on policy and strategy, which they've just thrown a lot of money at, if I'm being honest. Next slide. Within the destination management plan, we identified our target markets. This is something we call our eclectic vibers, and those are people who are most likely to embody those sustainable values, who are interested in culture, local experiences, and being immersive in the destination, as opposed to just coming and doing big tick box things. Next slide. And while we look at the eclectic vibers for leisure, there are also other segments that are really key to us. So I said the visiting friends and relatives, because Bristol has a population of people that are coming from all over the world and all over the country. It's really important to us that they do bring their friends and family here. So we're looking at how we can do better engagement in terms of local partners and local communities, which is something we're still working on. And also business and business event visitors. Conference, association, incentive travel. This is core to the Bristol offer and is only going to get stronger as our new venues open. Bristol Beacon is the largest space that we have in terms of business events in the centre of Bristol, and we're already seeing the change and the step change in that, where we have events for over 1,000 people that are coming in, and we're working across the city with those breakout spaces. An immense amount of work goes into this area, and I'm happy to pick up on any questions around this after. Next slide. Two other areas that we're looking at is development of domestic groups. We do a couple of events during the year where we focus in on those domestic groups. It can be anything from retirement groups, social groups, or special interests, and also educational travel. Last year, we hosted in Bristol the British Educational Travel Association, of which we're members. And Bristol is growing. It's always been strong for those international educational groups, but we're seeing a resurgence of them, particularly this year, where we've heard, particularly from French school groups, a growth in French school groups coming into the region. Next slide. Our growth themes, these are the areas in which we look at our product segmentation and how we're presenting the region and the destinations. So we have new culture. This is embracing everything from screen tourism, food and drink, street art. This is the cultural excellence that we have here, but presenting it in a much more cohesive fashion. Heritage reinterpreted, where we're not just telling the same stories that we've always told, but how we tell stories of underrepresented groups, whether it's social, gender, country of origin. It's that much more inclusive story about what makes Bristol, Bristol. And lastly, well-being, which is not just about spa and thermal waters down the road in Bath. It's access to green spaces and blue spaces, and that sense of connecting back into nature. Next slide. This is just the Ansoff matrix that was in the Destination Management Plan, and it highlights where we have work to do in terms of that product development. So working with local businesses about how you create experiences around these, but also how they're presented through content out into those wider distribution networks, as well as our own channels. Next slide. I alluded to this earlier. In the autumn, although I think we can narrow that down to November, there will be a new tourism strategy for England. Back in the year before last, the tourism minister announced the target of 50 million annual visits to the UK, up from 38. Like I said, we have challenges around visas and the ETAs. We have challenges around dispersal and just the cost of travel to the UK. So that's going to be a challenging target, but there's also, we expect there to be domestic targets in this. There were 3 working groups, one around skills, one around international, and one around regional dispersal. And I sat on the working groups for the last 2. But interestingly, Bristol Airport, once you take out the London and Scottish airports, if you look at the English regional airports, Bristol has the highest number of inbound visitors after Manchester. So it really is a gateway to the region and to England, and one which we're increasingly focused on developing, working with airlines and working with the airport. Just by way of how Visit West is structured, we fall into 4 areas. As I said, we're, as a public-private partnership, we have a commercial membership program where we have some 650 businesses in the region that we work with, supporting them and enabling them to develop routes to market. We have our consumer and travel trade marketing, which also includes a comprehensive PR and media program. And we welcome in the region of about 200 traditional and media influencers through the year. We have a team that's dedicated in supporting the conference and business events program. And one of their big wins that's coming up is we are looking at having a southern version of a trade show that we're hopefully bringing to Bristol. They're just in the process of sorting a venue. So that will be a big coup to us, not just to attract a new trade show in, but one that brings corporate and association and agent buyers in so they can experience the destination while they're here. And finally, the work that we do with central government, with DCMS and Visit Britain, but also around our supporting work with sustainability and accessibility, working with our local authority and regional authority partners, and looking at all the research work that is undertaken both by ourselves and how we can partner with others. And I think that's it. Sorry, I rattled through the last, but I suddenly realised what the time was and I wanted to leave time for questions.
Thanks, Catherine. That was a hugely comprehensive and impressive presentation. Huge thank you to you and your teams for all doing this amazing work. But it's clear there's some ways we can improve and work on driving Bristol tourism for the region, and you know, there's lots of areas we can work together to make better. So we're going to have questions now for the last section. We've got 13 minutes, and I'll start with Richard.
Catherine, I've got 2 questions. I'm interested, firstly, in the difference of activities chosen by our domestic over international visitors. And does that teach us anything as far as lessons?
Interestingly, some things are the same, that particularly for new visitors, whether they're international or domestic. So I said about street art. We know that there's a really strong interest in street art tours and that level of authenticity that they get here. And authenticity is increasingly key because people want meaningful experiences. And they can go out and they can look at street art in a book, they can look at a wall, but to have an artist taking the tours, it is really important. And so a lot of the work we do is about how we unpick and tell stories that people won't have heard before. So you can go on some of the tours, and Show of Strength do an incredible range of tours into not the traditional areas. So while they do a Harbourside tour, they also do one in Clifton and one in Bedminster and one in St George that are really interesting. So you will always get a mix of local people, domestic visitors and international on them. We do tend to see more international visitors looking at things like music and galleries because of the language barrier. You know, we're not great at international interpretation in many of our spaces, although not all of them. So there is that welcome language barrier there for some, but it all depends on content, and particularly from our cultural sector, because that programme is evolving and changing all the time. We can see the boost in numbers going back and looking at MShed when they did their Bristol Music exhibition a few years ago, the bounce in numbers through that, because people are genuinely interested in Bristol's music heritage, not just seeing it, but learning in the background as well. So there's the language barrier and how much you can physically do in the time while you're here.
Thank you for that. Secondly, I'm interested in the visitor experience and the direction of travel. Just for example, appreciation of cultural assets, has that gone down, increased, or stayed the same roughly?
In terms of cultural assets, I mean, you only have to be anywhere near the suspension bridge to look at how important that is for people to go up and take the photograph. So that's what I was saying about not being afraid to lean into the icons. That's really important. How we create new ones is even more important. One of the things that we know visitors don't like is seeing homeless people on the streets, and we know that antisocial behaviour is a challenge, and we know that litter is a challenge. So a lot of the things that people don't like are not just unique to Bristol, but you know, that's the lasting impression that people leave going away. And one of the things that we haven't been able to get off the ground yet is what tourist information looks like in the long run. Obviously, we're not funded in a way to deliver that service anymore, but we're looking at alternatives. So that's the other kind of cultural asset, I guess, that's gone. But our cultural infrastructure is growing, and so the challenge is going to be communicating just how this grows and ensuring that when people are coming in for theatre or performance experiences, that they're staying longer and doing more where they're here, not just shooting in and out for a performance.
Fine, thanks.
Stephen.
Two questions. First of all, an easy one. Are there plans to have a photo opportunity with the word Bristol anywhere? Because if you travel to other cities now, quite often you see, you know, Riga or Tallinn or whatever, and people doing their selfies in front of the word that is the city. I was in Newport last week. Even Newport's got one, but Bristol doesn't. Other than that mural that's in a side street by Quakers Friars. So could we perhaps think about the merits of having one of those on somewhere like the top of the Cascade Steps in the centre as an obvious sort of central backdrop for the city? So that's an easy one. But my question is, how much are Bristol and Bath rivals, and how much can we support and complement each other? Quite often in a previous job, when I was going up and down on the train to London, quite often at the posh end of the train, you would see people getting on the train on a Monday morning from Bath, but not from Bristol, and coming back on a Thursday. Lots of people getting out at Bath rather than Bristol. And sometimes I would chat to them, and quite often these international visitors had never even heard of Bristol, but they'd all heard of Bath. I guess some of this comes down to what's on display in London hotels or even at Paddington Station. Is there enough promotion of Bristol and Bath, maybe as a joint destination?
Well, that's what we're working on. As I said, post-COVID, we were in a really difficult position in terms of funding, but we're now in a much better place. Part of the reason that you get the Stonehenge Bath Windsor trip and it stops in Bath rather than Bristol is that's the limit a coach can actually travel in a day and go back. So there's a very practical reason why it only goes to Bath. Because we've had these conversations, believe me, on many occasions. It's a mix. You do have more staying visitors in Bristol than Bath because there's more hotel rooms, but this is very much about us working together across the whole region, because people will stay in Bristol and go to Bath, and people stay in Bath and come to Bristol, particularly if you're an international visitor. So it's getting people to base themselves here and do more while they're here. I don't think it's a rivalry. I don't think that's helpful or healthy, because why would you do one and not the other? We need people to come and spend longer and experience more. And when they're 10 minutes apart by train, to the point we had a major convention here last year, where the main plenary of the event was at the University of Bath. The students for the event stayed at the campus accommodation. All the professors associated with the event stayed in Bristol, and they did stuff between the two, because it's quicker to get between Bristol and Bath than it is from Paddington to Charing Cross, and nobody talks about that being an issue. So it's just how we do the presentation piece. But yes, 100% needs to be more promotion.
Tips.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot about what you and your team do. I guess this one is more from a relationship perspective. How do you see the relationship between Visit West and City Council? How can that work better? What are the gaps? What are the opportunities? Do we have a service level agreement with each other that fast tracks and supports what you guys do? Or even this task or this suggestion from Stephen, how complicated would that end up making matters in terms of just planning and this, whilst you have a simple thing that you're trying to do? What are the barriers? And I think I'm asking this so that we understand the challenges that you have with making the city a bit more of a destination space.
We have regular I have regular meetings with Phil Walker and with Alex Hearn and other individuals within the council, and Annie's back on our Visit West board. There are engagement touch points. There's probably more that we can all do to make that easier. We've worked in partnership to deliver the Women's Rugby World Cup. We've got the cricket next year, and there's a huge opportunity for us all to work in partnership and understand what the prizes are a little more, and I think be a little more focused on what the goal is, because I'm not sure that the visitor voice has always been heard in Bristol in terms of planning and everything else. And we're getting there. It is getting there, but COVID interrupted everything, and I think, like I said, our challenge, not to spend too much time looking back, but our challenge is that we lost considerable amount of funding from Bristol, which obviously has now stopped, that makes it quite difficult to have a service level agreement if there's no funding. And a lot of what we're doing now is we're trying to work with the council, and we're trying to work with, particularly through Bristol Culture, to really enable people, because, you know, this is our area of expertise, this is what we do. And it's really important that, you know, we continue to present opportunities, and it's really very much up to the council what they choose to take forward or not. So whether it's bidding for events, or whether it's creating products through the museum service that can be sold internationally, or whether it's how we partner to be more than the sum, you know, how we can really strengthen that partnership, it is critical. So there's always more you can do, there's always more we can do. And by having a strong two-way conversation, it's what happens when it goes internally. I think it is, you know, there's a lot more in the council than there are of us. So it's just how we reach beyond that.
Thanks, Catherine. Right, so we've got 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to do a quick summary, see if Annie wanted to come up with any thoughts for the end of the meeting, and then we'll close. I think it's clear the data is absolutely vital in understanding where the opportunities are in the visitor economy. And it's great to see that nationally the government are looking to see those areas of growth that can drive visitor economy. But I think one of the things you said in your presentation was around policy and strategy, and how that can also push investment and partnership working. And we have an opportunity with our development of the cultural strategy to do that and think about what those actions might look like. Investment's always going to be an issue with the challenges that we face across the local authority, but working with our partners at the combined authority, we can really drive visitor economy for our region. And you've highlighted some really key ways that we can do that. We had something in the council, which was a drive for Bristol to be one of the most accessible cities in the country. So it was great to see that people feel that it's accessible, but we obviously have more work to do there. And it's interesting that Carly highlighted that in our quality of life survey, local people don't feel as safe, but actually visitors do feel safe generally. So but there's also more work to do. I'll just ask Annie to come up with any final thoughts, but thank you, Catherine, for your time and the presentation. And this is the first of lots of conversations where you and your team will be involved in actions and the cultural strategy. So thank you, Annie.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Catherine, for coming and giving such a clear and informative presentation. It's really useful for everybody, and demonstrates quite what a huge piece of work that you do in Visit West, and how important it is to the culture sector and the economy generally. It's amazing work, and thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well done. Doing that by yourself as well was well done.
No, it's fine. Thanks for offering to help.
I mean, not a huge amount that I could actually do, but
no, but thanks for offering. Well, I'm just going to stop the recording.